Hello there and welcome to Wild and Finally Fucking Free, where midlife isn't a time of crisis but a time of metamorphosis. Just like the journey through puberty and pregnancy to postpartum, our midlife transition is also a powerful portal of rebirth. The wise woman inside of us is calling, inviting us to slow down, to take stock, to speak our truth, to burn away all that no longer serves us, ready to step forward into our next phase of life. I'm your host, Kylie Patchett, storyteller and midlife self-care coach, and together we'll unearth the real and raw stories of women who are right in the messy, magical middle or have come out the other side, and the healers who help all of us through these crossroads of change. I hope that as you listen to these tales of breaking the ties that bind, shedding skins, and courageously chasing midlife dreams, that you too will answer the wise woman's invitation and set yourself wild and finally fucking free. Let's dive in. Well, hello there. Welcome to season 3. I feel like I need a drum roll or something, but you got the drums in the intro, so we'll just leave it with that. I am recording this on my final day of being 48. Tomorrow is my 49th birthday and also the day where we actually relaunch the podcast, season 3. And also, you probably have noticed by now, having a name change back to Wild and Finally Fucking Free. So I want to tell you a little bit about that. And it demonstrates a really brilliant midlife point. So if you don't know me, my name is Kylie. Back in September of 2022, I traveled to Sydney. I was very, very stressed, had a very full-on job, had a step-parent being diagnosed with dementia, dealing with 2 teenage girls, not yet diagnosed with ADHD and autism, and I felt like things were very rapidly unraveling. And my beautiful friend Ange gave me a journal to write in because I hadn't even thought to bring anything to write in. And I remember sitting on the bank of the beautiful, she lives in Sydney in an area where you can sit on an inlet and there's all these beautiful, boats and yachts and things and a gorgeous walking path and this gorgeous expanse of water. And I sat down there with a coffee and I opened this journal and I felt so stretched and stressed and not myself that I didn't even know what I wanted to feel. And I always come back to feelings because I know, there's a lot of us being told, set goals. But to me, the key thing is, what do I want to be feeling day to day? And I was feeling trapped. I was feeling stressed. I was feeling stretched. I was feeling pulled away from my inner voice, disconnected, really, really deeply unhappy, and also putting up walls in my relationships. And I wrote a little note to myself and I said, what do I actually want? How do I want to feel? And the answer was, I want to feel wild and finally fucking free. And I went on to write 3 pages of things that felt the opposite of that. Things like doing things out of obligation, what ended up being codependency patterns, but that's a whole other story. Eating crappy food, not taking care of myself, not prioritizing sleep, parenting in a way that didn't feel right. And I wrote this huge list, and part of the decision then was actually to leave my corporate job. So I did that a couple of months later and re-entered entrepreneurship for the second time. And one of the things that I'm deeply passionate about is sharing stories, and particularly sharing stories of transformation, metamorphosis, healing, breaking the ties that bind us, and understanding that although the ways that we may have been in our earlier lives may have worked up to a certain extent, that midlife is this perfect time of becoming much more aware of unhelpful patterns. And so I started this podcast, and it was called Wild and Finally Fucking Free because that was my deep desire. And since then, I have had around about 80 people on the show sharing their real raw stories of midlife metamorphosis. And then before I started season 2 back in April of 2023, I spoke to someone who was a real expert in podcasting. And I said to her, like, I really, really want this show to reach more people because I really believe that sharing these stories makes other women feel less isolated. And it also helps the person who's sharing the story. It's both cathartic, but it's also transformative when you can share your story, but also share the metamorphosis, the learnings, the change, the shifts. And it is also transformative for those who are listening to the stories. And I said to her, I really, really want to spread the word about this podcast. And she said, you know what? I think you actually need to have menopause in the title because you'll reach more people like that. Now, no shade on the podcast expert at all, not blaming this on her. I should have filtered that advice through my internal guidance system. And at the time that I changed to season 2, I was in the middle of a mental health crisis and I was very disconnected from my internal voice. So looking back, I can understand that I made a decision that wasn't aligned to my authentic self. The reason I don't want to call the podcast menopause anymore is a few different reasons. First of all, I don't feel like that name captures the fact that we showcase and share inspirational women doing courageous, inspirational, freeing things in midlife and beyond. And I also am very aware that the menopause space on social media is getting very crowded and loud. And I feel like I just want to really, really frame perimenopause as this positive, purposeful, sometimes painful, absolutely, but purposeful transition point. And I feel like there's a lot of messaging around menopause that is not positive and doesn't frame menopause as a powerful transformation point. It frames it as a hormone deficiency or horrible and things just go downhill or whatever. And I just don't want to be part of that vibe at all. So here we are, rebranded, wild and finally fucking free, with a little bit of a refreshed cover. And I guess the moral of the story for myself, and maybe for you, I don't know, is that even though you can ask other people about their opinions and certainly experts in the business world, you always need to trust that. You always need to filter that advice through your own internal knowing. And for bonus points, the second moral of the story for me is, if I'm not connected to myself, and I knew that then don't make decisions from that place. So I'm I'm learning to not rush into things when I'm not in the right energetic and emotional bandwidth to make decisions. So very much offering myself grace. That is just a very quick explanation to you of why the heck I've changed the name back. But you know what? The content of inspirational, courageous, breaking the ties that bind kind of stories is not changing. And the other thing that I am kind of beginning to get a little bit of an inkling about is maybe we might start talking to the men about midlife as well. I'm not sure about that, but that's kind of a little nudge that I keep on getting. So on with the show. This is a solo episode. I have not got a guest for today. And this is, I guess, I wanted to share a little bit of the journey that I've been undertaking because I feel like it is very similar to a lot of women in midlife. This time last year on my 48th birthday, and I've spoken about this a little bit on the podcast, but just if you haven't heard this story before, on my 48th birthday, my husband is a rural firefighter. And our fire season last year was really, really bad. And there was one area in Queensland called Tara where there was continual large-scale events that threatened houses and communities and livestock, etc. It was a really horrible season. And on the morning of my 48th birthday, my husband, my youngest daughter, who is also a rural firefighter, well, she's a volunteer, and her partner, who is also a rural firefighter volunteer, left to go to a large-scale fire event at 1:00 in the morning. And my birthday ended up being a day by myself. And it actually, now I look back, was a huge blessing. But right then, it opened up a very wounded, very loud part of me that felt completely insignificant. Now, obviously, when people's homes are under threat, people don't think about birthdays. That's fair enough. But to me and the little 3 or 4-year-old that also felt insignificant, I had a lot of emotion come to the surface. And I actually remember really clearly being on the floor of my office, just sobbing, like uncontrollable sobbing. And if you have also been someone who's gone through any sort of trauma, and particularly trauma that's in your formative years when you're learning about the world, a lot of us have a feeling that if we ever let the emotion out, that it would be like some Pandora's box, and not in a good way, so that it would be too overwhelming. And I certainly felt like I just didn't have the capacity to open it because I was scared that I would never get it closed again. It turns out that having that day on my 48th birthday, which is 364 days ago, was a huge, it opened a huge geyser of untended trauma. And as much as that sounds awful, and it was absolutely bloody awful at the time, what it actually forced me to do was look at the ways in which I hadn't tended to myself and ask for support, get support, and put some really significant changes in place in my life, in my family, and also in my business. So the gift of that untended trauma erupting from the surface, and I will just say a little side note to that, perimenopause symptoms overlap a lot of the symptoms of trauma being trapped in the body and also the symptoms of stress. So if you think about perimenopause, and if you have untended trauma, and or if you're under some other stresses in midlife, like, teenagers or God forbid school age children, because I know there's people that because they had babies later, school age, like little school age kids and perimenopause overlapping. Thank goodness that was not the timing of my life. And if that is a time of yours, sending so much big love, because trying to be a mama in those really intense years and also take care of yourself in perimenopause, holy moly, I want to take my hats off to you and give you a big hug. So, side note about the trauma, stress, and perimenopause is that often women will hit a crisis point in midlife, not be aware that they're in perimenopause, and blame the crisis point on stress. And often it can actually be that perimenopause has been playing out for a few years. And if you're like me and you've got the untended trauma under the surface, when our emotional bandwidth gets smaller, which it can sometimes do in perimenopause, our coping and numbing mechanisms, so for me, staying busy, caring for other people so I don't have to look at my own emotions, eating emotionally, and at times binge eating, have always been numbing and coping mechanisms to hide from the trauma. And all of a sudden, none of those were working. Now, as much as that sounds horrible, and I'm not discounting the horribleness, I've gone through some pretty tough times in the last 12 months, but the gift has been that I was forced to really look at how I was taking care of myself and put things in place that anchored very simple things that made sure that I was nourishing myself, moving, getting enough time out to relax, and also prioritizing sleep. It's made me much more reverent with my resources. So I speak about this with clients all the time that, when we go into perimenopause, the potential is that we may have less energy, we may have less stress tolerance. We may be not sleeping as well. And so fatigue is playing a key. And when you think about your resources as your love, your time, your attention, your emotional bandwidth, we are really being called to be much more reverent. So not spend it willy-nilly and then end up with nothing left at the end of the day or end of the week or whatever. Not push ourselves to crash and burn stage, which a lot of us have, been there, done that, got the t-shirt. Be a lot more respectful of ourselves. And whilst this is still a work in progress, I have definitely benefited from getting to that crisis point. I think my biggest lessons from there is that I have become much more aware of my actual emotional and energetic bandwidth. So sometimes I use the word battery. So I feel like I've got this new watch actually, and it's supposed to give you this body battery measurement. I don't even know how it's measured, so who knows? But I mean, it's measuring the same thing every day, right? So it's a relative measurement. And it surprised me that I feel like when I sleep for 8 hours at night, I therefore should be feeling fully energized the next day. But my watch tells me a different thing, that some nights I have a really crap amount of sleep, or I'm at high stress during sleep. And that's often because of heat in Queensland. Far out, it's been hot. But yeah, knowing what your batteries are like and being really honest with yourself. And I have had to really stop myself from saying I should be able to do all of this, to actually understanding what I can. And this is totally a growth edge for me, so it's not one and done. I've really understood that I need much more time to myself than I ever have. So I really, really need solo time. And I really need time that is not, it's not allocated to anything. So I call it pottering time, or I call it mooching time, like just days. And generally I like to do this on weekend, but sometimes I like solo pottering time, and that's when my husband's at home. So that doesn't work. So I've had to carve that out in other times, but just pottering around, like maybe I'll end up doing some gardening. Maybe I'll read a book. Maybe I'll just be drawing for whatever. And that's the other big requirement that I need. It's like my need for creative flow time, which is not attached to business or getting stuff done, like achievement, is actually, I reckon, around about the same requirement as my need for achieving things. Like I still get a hit of dopamine every time I tick something off my to-do list. But I realize now that if I don't have my solo time, my pottering time, and my creative time, that I can actually do less with the time that I've got, which has been a massive learning for me. The other thing that's changed for me since I finally, when I was journaling back a couple of years ago, or 18 months ago now, is that an autism and ADHD diagnosis, there's a lot of people that say, oh, why bother getting labeled? It's just another label. But for me, it has been a huge journey in understanding that my brain works differently to other people, and to embrace the superpowers that come with that, because there is a lot of superpowers that come with being neurosparkly, I call it, not neurodivergent. But there is also real, not limitations, I don't even want to say that word, but challenges with the amount of battery that you've got, particularly if you're in a very overstimulating environment. I had a perfect example of this last Saturday night. We went to a party for our beautiful friend's our beautiful friend's son, who turned 5's birthday party. It was 38 degrees. If you're overseas, that is 100 plus. It was about 80% humidity. So it was awful. There was no wind. There was, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 kids maybe. And it was my husband's work crew. So I didn't know a lot of the people. And by the end of that evening, I was so done in terms of overstimulation, because I was hot, which makes me feel overstimulated anyway. I'm starting to get hot flushes again. So there was that on top of that. And I didn't, it's not like all the people were friendly, but because I didn't already know them, I had to work harder at having conversations, right? You don't know what you can kind of, how's Maddie and the kids or whatever. And also a lot of noise, because the kids were all, bouncing around on a jumping castle and on a water slide. But there was also a lot of kids hitting the wall and having meltdowns. And I don't deal with that very well anymore. Sorry, parents with young kids, but that's just me being honest. And so understanding when I get overstimulated and really appreciating that is because my brain works differently, but also because the changes in perimenopause do impact the way that estrogen interacts with other neurotransmitters, which then have an on-flow effect to the ADHD and autism symptoms. So long story short, that's a lot of detail, but long story short, what the hitting the wall on my 48th birthday and having all of this kind of aha moment around this is it's actually invited me to another level of life and business tweaking. So, back when I was like, I want to be wild and finally fucking free, the biggest things were eat better, move more, prioritize sleep, lose your job. So I did all of those things. But when this crisis point happened, it just invited me to a whole new level. So in life and in business, there's been a huge amount of shifting for me. I have really, really consciously pivoted and then pivoted and then pivoted again my business to be firmly planted in an arena for both storytelling and self-care coaching that is using my natural talents and not making me do anything that costs me a lot of emotional and energetic bandwidth. And so, for instance, writing and communicating, like speaking a podcast and writing a newsletter, but also writing copy for a client, come really naturally to me. It doesn't cost me much because that is part of the creative flow that my brain is good at. But doing something more like, I don't know, straight admin tasks really drains my battery. Hey gorgeous, we interrupt this gold for a delicious invitation. If your whole body has been whispering more lately, more voice, more truth, more satisfaction, more clients of the soulmate variety, more cash, more you, then this invitation is for you. Potent, my sister mind is officially open. This is my high touch, holy fuck, I'm ready sister mind for rebels in good girl clothing who are done outsourcing their power and diluting their magic to fit into someone else's business formula. If you have been craving a space where your strategy, your voice, and your energy all get to be offered, honored, refined, and amplified, this is it. Inside of Potent, you'll get my eyes on your business every single week, copy mentoring, and that is for brand copy and content storytelling that turns your truth into client catnip, energetic recalibration that helps you unhook old learned limitation patterns, keeping you quiet, not being seen, not being heard, real-time, high-touch, one-on-one coaching that actually sees the bigness of your vision, and the kind of sisterhood that does not flinch when you show up in your full, messy, brilliant, phoenix rising from the ashes glory. This isn't surface level support. It's deep, potent, paradigm shifting work that changes who you are as a woman in business and a woman in life. We start in August. Early open access is open right now. For the month of June 2025, inside of this early access open doors period, you will receive juicy bonuses, extended payment plans, and access immediately to my entire library of storytelling gold. You'll find all the juicy details at kyliepatchett.com/potent. And we fill spaces, and there's only 10 of them, and more than likely only 5 by the time you listen to this, because by that time I will have offered them to the existing cohort, the beautiful original OG circle. We do actually take applications on a first come, first served basis. So come and apply, and let's get back to the magic of the episode. I've also booked in a solo day at least once per fortnight so that I can actually have time out that isn't time when my husband is in the house. I've started this thing where I was going to try and work according to my cycle, but we have officially hit the time when my periods can be anything between 10 days apart and 30 days apart. So there is no cycle that you can depend on. But what I've decided to do instead is sync my work cycle to actually working for the first 3 weeks of the lunar month. Working all 4 weeks, but having client interactions and, outward facing client meetings for the first 3 weeks, and then keeping that final week of the month completely free of client appointments, because it allows me to have a little bit more bandwidth and battery saving mode, but also to go deep into that creative flow mode. So finish up client projects, write the next social media posts for myself, etc. I also have chosen not to have client calls on any Monday or Friday, and I've just hired, oh my goodness, I'm so excited about this, VA support for all the stuff in my business that I am actually either not suited to do or don't love doing. I'll also say that all of these changes, this is what has worked so far for me. A couple of those things I've only just put in place, like the solo day and client weeks 3 out of 4 and whatever. But I will also say that it is perfectly normal in your menopause or midlife transition to have an invitation to look at some of the patterns in your life and to make changes, and for those things to work for however long they work, and then to hit another wave of change. And it is really, really normal. And I think a lot of us go, oh my God, I thought I had this sorted. But the thing is that your hormonal landscape continues to change until you're officially, well, it continues to change anyway, but, until you actually reach that menopause date, 12 months post your last period, things are still changing. So at the moment, I am actually really noticing that I am far more easily overstimulated and overwhelmed, and I've got a level of anxiety back that I haven't probably since April last year. So, almost 12 months. At the moment, Queensland heat is just stifling. We've been at 35, which is about 98 plus, and high humidity for weeks and weeks and weeks. And because I'm finding that I'm getting more hot flushes back, which were really stable with the current HRT and lifestyle interventions that I use, I'm finding the heat really overwhelming, because then, I'm hot and humid, and then you put a hot flush on top of that, and I get that panicky feeling, which is really awful. And the other thing that's going on, unfortunately, at the time of recording this, is my stepdad is in hospital for an acute change to his dementia. And that obviously comes with a lot more space holding and energetic bandwidth. And that is really common for us in midlife. Like, I know a lot of you that are listening in have aging relatives that you're part of the caring kind of support network around, or you're holding space for kids doing final exams or going to uni or figuring their own stuff out or having mental health challenges yourself or whatever. So I just want to say, I guess that there's an invitation. There's an invitation for all of us. And I hope that by listening to shows like this, that frame perimenopause as positive and as purposeful, that instead of just seeing the painful parts, like just seeing the overstimulation, the overwhelming, and the anxiety and the wanting to rage at everyone or whatever it is that's going on for you, actually seeing that as part of this beautiful process that is constantly inviting us to look at our lives and to tweak. And I guess my question to you is something being called to your attention at the moment? Do you need to be more reverent with your resources? Do you need to ask for help somewhere or get some professional support? Do you need to set some boundaries around something? That's been a huge thing for me in this last 12 months, is setting boundaries around relationships where I've always overstepped and been the caretaker or the one that figures everything out. And I'm realizing how much that cost me. But also the other thing is how much it disempowers the people that you're doing it for. And I'm actually talking about a parent and kids at the moment. Is there an invitation to take things off your plate? Is your battery lower? Is your bandwidth decreasing? And is there an invitation to you to clearly and honestly communicate what you need? And I guess the caveat to that is you've got to have the space to actually get quiet enough to actually listen to your internal, I always say the wise woman, like that internal authentic voice that very often knows already what we need to do, but sometimes our lives are so busy or so full, or our habits and our patterns or our conditioning is so strong that we're operating on automatic pilot. And often part of this invitation process is to actually just sit with yourself, kind of like I did sitting on the edge of that water with my journal and be saying, what do I actually want? What do I actually want? Who the fuck am I? Oh, dear. I really, really hope that sharing these stories helps you to see ways in which maybe you could begin shedding some old skins or limiting beliefs or things that no longer serve you. And yeah, our very first guest interview, which will be out next week, very interesting interview, talks with someone who's postmenopausal, who's doing a PhD in menopause. And it's actually about the narrative of menopause and the story or the heroine's journey of menopause. And we talk in that interview about what's the message of the heat burning through us? Is it unexpressed anger? Is it boundaries that need to be set? Is it that you're angry with yourself because you keep on doing things that, are disrespectful or abandoning yourself? And I think the invitation is always turn inwards. Turn inwards and please always share. Always share. Please don't ever try and do this tricky, messy, magical middle without support in place. Our friends around us who are going through a similar thing or a group or, commenting on this podcast or connecting with other people in midlife groups, whatever it is, just stay connected because you don't have to do it alone. You don't have to do it alone. You're not the first person who's actually felt like they're being pushed through the eye of a needle. And thank you for being here. I would love to know who you would like to hear from. There's actually a new contact form on my website at www.kpcreative.com.au, which is kpkreative.com.au. So if you would like to come and share your story, or if you've got an idea for a guest who you'd love me to interview, and you know me, I like to get to the truth of the matter. So if there's someone that you, are curious about, send me a contact little ping on the website, or just reach out and DM me on Instagram is always easy as well. Thank you for being here. Here's to another fresh new season. Here's to trusting our own internal guidance systems, and here's to listening to the wise woman's invitation. Until next time, goodbye. Thank you so much for tuning in, my friend. And if you enjoyed this ep, please share it with another midlife friend, or take the opportunity to go and rate and review the show on your favorite listening platform. All of these things really help us to reach more women in midlife. Now, I don't know if you know, but I am both a storyteller who helps healers and helpers capture and communicate their work through the magic of storytelling, and I'm a midlife self-care coach who is super passionate about helping other women reframe perimenopause and midlife as a powerful and purposeful time of transformation. To find out more about me and my work, you can head to Instagram at Kylie Patchett, or my website, kpcreative.com.au, and that is kpcreative.com.au, and you will find all of those links in the show notes. Have a spectacular day, and may you be setting yourself wild and finally fucking free.